What's up, Mafia Nation? It's your boy DJ SKALE.
That's my CAIN.
And we're here to do another music video review for you.
Let's do it.
Get it. So today's video is brought to you by Victor Mordeau. Victor Mordeau. Thank you very much, Victor. And it is The Fallen of World War II. I'm a big history buff.
Yeah, I was in the military as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
I like history.
I dig it. So let's check this out. But before we do that, go ahead and subscribe.
Bang that notification bell.
And like, comment, and share to everybody.
Everybody. Share it with your friends.
So,
we ready?
Check this out.
These big ass headphones.
You do have some large headphones.
I do.
But mine are still purple, they're blue.
So comfortable over the ear.
The average lifespan of an American is 80 years. And an 80-year-old today was 10 when World War II ended, 4 when it began. A soldier who saw battle would have to be in his late 80s, at least today.
Oh, this was released in
Generals, political leaders, the decision makers of the war, few are still with us.
Wow.
And over the past few decades, we've seen authors and filmmakers rush to capture stories from survivors before this connection of memory is lost. This project is not about individual war stories, and it's not about survivors. We're going to tally up the tens of millions of people whose lives are cut short by the war, and see how these numbers stack up to other wars in history, including trends in recent conflicts.
Okay.
We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately. Each of these figures represents 1,000 people who died. Civilians were of all walks of life, whereas military deaths were almost entirely men. The average age was about 23. In most battles, for every 1,000 soldiers killed, there are more than 1,000 who are injured. The word casualty can be confusing because in military speak, it often includes both deaths and injuries, and anything else that takes a soldier out of service. Here, we're just counting the deaths, and we'll begin with American soldiers. Over 400,000 died.
Oh, wow.
Crazy.
Most of the deaths occurred in the European theater, fighting the Nazis. And about a quarter were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. When you put them on the timeline, you see that casualties were the heaviest at the end of the war. The war began on September 1st, 1939.
That makes sense because
But the U.S. wasn't willing to join the fight until Pearl Harbor,
How do I do the
2
things?
years in.
That makes sense because in World War II, I know that they made a lot of technology happen. Like there was a serious science push from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes absolute sense that by the end of the war, they were just like,
yeah.
At the beginning, and I know in the beginning of World War II, I know that when they invaded Poland, they were the Polish had horses and swords.
Right.
Right. It was pretty serious at that point in time, and I know that now. At the end of the war, they were talking about they had gun offs and shit. It's the biggest gun and things. So, I mean,
Be pretty sweet though.
right?
You know what I mean?
Can you imagine the amount of technology and the crazy things that have just? This is now here.
Right.
All right,
Yeah.
let's get back to it. Don't do that.
The deaths increased drastically on D-Day, when the Allies invaded Normandy. One of the most tragic moments of the war was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, where 2,500 Americans fell. So about the same number of U.S. soldiers died on this single beach landing as the entire 13 years of the recent war in Afghanistan.
Wow.
The bloodiest battle in the Pacific was Okinawa, which lasted 82 days, during which 12,500 Americans died.
12,500.
About 5,000 of these deaths were at sea from kamikaze attacks. Now let's look at some other countries, starting with Europe. Germany started World War II when it invaded Poland. Poland ultimately lost 200,000 soldiers in the war.
Like I know or something.
Most died after the invasion while the country was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany, meanwhile, lost just 16,000 in the invasion of Poland. The Nazis went on to invade and conquer other countries, including Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Greece, and Yugoslavia. France surrendered, but after losing 92,000 soldiers in the Battle of France. Over 200,000 ultimately fell, which includes deaths in POW camps, French colonies, and other fighting. Yugoslavia suffered almost 500,000 military deaths.
Wow.
The initial invasion brought relatively few casualties on both sides. But the deaths mounted under Nazi occupation due to guerrilla fighting, civil conflict, and mass executions. The Nazi invasions were swift, with relatively few German losses.
That's
Even
mind-blowing.
the Nazi commanders expressed surprise at their success. And then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, who were not invaded but took the fight to the Nazis. Britain lost about the same number of soldiers as the US, which includes the British colonies. Germany lost about 500,000 soldiers fighting the US and Britain in what is known as the Western Front, which took place in France and Belgium.
Technology versus technology in that sense.
Yep.
But most Nazi soldiers died in the Eastern Front, Germany's unsuccessful invasion of the Soviet Union. The numbers
Wow, look
are
at that,
staggering.
dude.
The most famous battle of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the turning point in the European
Stalingrad.
War, was Stalingrad. The German 6th Army successfully took Stalingrad, but then got surrounded by the Soviets and cut off from food and ammunition. 500,000 Nazis would ultimately die in
Freezing to
Stalingrad.
death.
Right.
Starving to death.
Another 100,000 were taken prisoner, of which 6,000 would ever return. POWs had a low survival rate throughout World War II, and it was particularly grim in the East. When you include these POWs, roughly the same number of Germans died in Stalingrad as all the Western Front fighting against France, the UK, and the US. And though Stalingrad was a victory for the Soviets, they
That
suffered
is-
almost
that's
twice
crazy.
as many losses as Germany.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union would eventually defeat the once unstoppable German
So
army,
many people,
killing
man.
2.3
Yeah, dude.
million Nazi soldiers.
2.3 million
winning the
Nazi
war
soldiers.
Came at a cost.
Holy
That's-
crap. It just keeps
Going
going.
and going. Dude, that's incredible. That is an outrageous number of people. It just doesn't stop. Like, what do you say to that? Is it
That's, yeah. I mean, well, I mean, here's the thing: is that was under a dictatorship at that point in time. So literally, he's sending out everybody, every
Right.
man, child, and
Right.
little boy that can carry a gun,
Yeah.
literally into the
8.7
barren,
million is
frozen.
the official tally by the Russian military, a hotly disputed number. Some studies have calculated as many as 14 million dead.
We're seeing those
To complete the
graphs
count of
when I was
European
in,
military
like,
deaths,
elementary school.
we need to add German
talking
deaths
about
from other
this and
fronts,
going,
including
"No
the
way."
North and Africa, as well as deaths from other Axis powers allied with the Nazis, Hungary, Romania, and Italy. When you put these European military deaths on the timeline, it looks like this. You can now interact with the chart to learn more. Pause the narration if you would like more time.
No thanks.
And now we switch to civilian deaths in Europe.
Civilian. Now, see, this is mind blowing too, because
Right.
like in Europe, like you had the Luftwaffe doing some crazy night
6
bombing.
million Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. If
Yeah.
you separate this by country, you see that about half, 2.7 million, were Polish. 700,000 were Soviets, followed by Hungary and 17 other countries. Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million were killed in the concentration camps. Over 1 million died in Auschwitz. Most were killed in the gas chambers. Others died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, and other forms of execution.
That's absolutely crazy.
The second most deadly camp was Treblinka, which was exclusively an extermination camp, set up to look like a train station.
Set up to look like a train
Mobile killing
station.
groups killed 1.4 million Jews.
Yeah.
Like with the gas
I don't know if this is gonna delve this deep into this process, but I know that in that process, like that was part of their science push too, which is like a mind blow. That like they pushed, and like that's where like literally everything that's in a medical textbook that tells you how to do whatever with a human body, like most all of it was learned in those concentration camps.
Yeah, because you gotta.
I mean, it's
survival at that point.
The horrible things that happened in those places.
Yeah.
Are just terrible to think about, but every doctor that you look at is learned from that process.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't like doctors, kids.
gas chambers, men were killed first to reduce the risk of revolt.
Music is so suspenseful.
It is.
The Holocaust
It's
also
keeping me
includes
like really on the edge of my seat.
Between 130,000 to 500,000 Roma, then called gypsies, were killed. The numbers are disputed. About 250,000 people with disabilities were killed. Homosexuals, Catholics, and other groups were also exterminated, but their numbers are relatively small.
Yeah.
Some historians say that other civilian deaths should go under the label of Holocaust. About 2 million non-Jewish Poles were killed under German occupation, some of which were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. When you combine civilian and military deaths, over 16% of the total Polish population died in World War II,
16%,
which is the highest percentage of any country,
population.
but not the highest in total death count. The Soviet Union again tops that list, losing at least as many civilians as it did soldiers.
Man.
Somewhere between 10 and 20 million. A particularly dark moment for the Soviet Union was the siege of
between 10
Leningrad,
to 20
now
million?
St.
10
Petersburg.
and 20 million people.
German forces surrounded
Civilian
Leningrad
people.
before
Right.
civilians could be evacuated.
And they said
Supplies,
8.5
including
million
food,
people
cut off for 2.5
soldier-wise.
That's insane, dude.
1.5 million people died
I
as a
want to know.
result,
I mean, I realize
mostly
that
from
it's,
starvation.
I realize
mostly
it's a
civilian.
very large country, but I
Stalin's
wonder
cruelty
what
towards his own
percentage of
people
that
is
country
partly
it
responsible
was.
for these numbers.
Right, yeah.
He often didn't allow civilians to evacuate from cities, thinking it would cause the soldiers protecting them to fight harder. About 1 million Soviets died in Stalin's own labor camps, called the Gulag. Just about every country suffered civilian losses, especially countries who were invaded. While many died as a result of so-called collateral damage, the biggest numbers occurred when it was no accident. Civilians were exterminated, purposely fired upon or bombed, used as human shields, or intentionally deprived of food. The
Dude, you
intentional
do that
killing of
shit now,
civilians was done by most
and
warring
you're
parties,
done.
including
Yeah.
the United
You know what I
Kingdom
mean?
and
Like-
United
Yeah.
States. The United Kingdom
It's
was spared of a
insane.
land invasion, but still lost 60,000 civilians, largely from German air raids or blitzes, often directed at civilian population centers.
German air raids. That's the
The
Luftwaffe I
UK
was
did the
talking
same to
about.
German cities at a much greater magnitude, causing
They
about
called it a
10 times the number
blitzkrieg.
of deaths.
Blitzkrieg.
But most German civilian deaths came from the ground at the late stage of the war. When the Nazi regime collapsed, civilians living in occupied
Really hope
regions
that my
had to
history
desperately flee
teachers
the
from like
advancing Soviet
school are
army.
watching this going,
Rapes were widespread.
I really didn't pay
Death
attention.
rates
What
ranged
the
from
hell?
600,000
Right?
to 3 million.
Yep. I wish I would have paid attention a little bit more back then.
Let's
you
step
know what
back
I mean?
and see where we are with the totals.
My teachers hated me because I could always know the
We
answer,
just
but I
counted
never
about
took a
20
note
million
ever.
civilian deaths in Europe. If you add this to the European military deaths we already covered, it brings us to over 40 million. Then we have the Asian theater. Here we see the vast majority of military deaths in Asia came from China and Japan.
Yet again, throwing
On the civilian side, about 6 million deaths from China, Indonesia, Korea, Indochina, and the Philippines can be attributed to Japanese war crimes, which are sometimes compared to the Nazi atrocities due to the sheer scale of the cruelty. China had the second highest death count after the Soviet Union. And like the
Yet
Soviets,
again,
the Chinese government demonstrated a stunning willingness to sacrifice its own people. Chinese nationalists opened the dike at the Yellow River, hoping the flood would halt the Japanese advance. 500,000 Chinese civilians or more were killed, which is 2 or 3 times the number who died in all countries in the 2004 Asian tsunamis. But the invasion of China only cost Japan 200,000 soldiers. Most were killed fighting the US and allies in the Pacific War.
Because yet again, that was
A
technology
significant
versus
portion of
sticks and
Japanese civilian
stones.
deaths were caused by American firebombing and the 2 nuclear attacks. Contrary to official US statements, these airstrikes were directed at civilian populations, not military targets. When you add all the deaths outside of Europe, it brings us to a grand total of 70 million for the war.
70
Give or take, depending on who's
million.
counting, and what civilian deaths get included.
Man.
More people died in World War II than in any other war in history.
70
For
million
comparison,
people.
here are 20 or so of the very worst wars and atrocities we have on record. Some of these are more of atrocities than wars, but we've seen how that distinction can get blurred.
I mean, Mao was 40.
Some of these spanned across centuries.
This is
World War II had the highest body count, and it all happened in just 6 years. The world's population has grown significantly since the earliest
the 30
atrocities on
Years
this
War
list.
only had 7
If you want
million.
to compare them in terms of
30
percentage of the world
years.
died, we can adjust the chart to look like this. This rough approximation tells us there may have been more devastating wars before World War II, proportionally speaking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Was that up? I didn't see that one that was so up there. I missed it.
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I didn't see what it was. But it was way
It
up
was
there.
just-
When we turn to post-war conflicts, it's hard to say anything that isn't controversial.
We are
But the
here.
data shows something quite extraordinary has been happening.
No, we're right here, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm technically.
In 1989, John
6
Gaddis
years
coined the
later.
phrase the long peace to identify the absence of conflict between the nuclear powers during the Cold War. 25 years later, the Cold War is over, and the term is still being used, although its meaning may have shifted. European countries have not fought each other, except for this 10-day war in 1956 when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. When we look at European wars before World War II, it looks like this. They tend to be more frequent as you go back, though smaller in scale. And the largest 44 economies of the world have not battled each other since World War II.
That's awesome.
Rich countries have
I
fought
believe that's
poor
all because of the
countries,
United
like
Nations.
the US versus Iraq. But rich countries have not
Right.
fought other rich countries.
Yep.
Such a period of peace between the so-called great powers hasn't been seen since the Roman
The
Empire.
Great Powers. Warsaw Pact?
To many, peace is too strong of a word. Wars have occurred since World War II, and they can be grouped into these 4 categories. We don't see colonial wars anymore. We've already noted that interstate wars between rich countries have not occurred at all, and here we see wars involving smaller economies have tapered off. That leaves civil wars of 2 types, with and without foreign intervention. And this is what these battle deaths look like alongside of World War II. More people died fighting in World War II than in all the wars since.
Yeah.
And again,
by
we can't
far.
forget about world population,
Affirmative.
which has almost tripled since World War II. If we scale these numbers to show
You
deaths
also
in
can't yet
proportion to world
again
population,
Forget
showing the likelihood that a
technology
person on
that
Earth
has
dies
come
in battle,
into play.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
downward trend becomes even more pronounced. Now, this isn't to infer anything about why this
Because
trend
I'm
is
sure that
occurring.
if you look
That's
back
a discussion
before
for
World
another
War
day.
II, there wasn't much
You can now
technology
interact
there.
with this chart
Right.
to
Like it
explore
would
what
see,
conflicts
they've
are
been
behind
fucking
the
beating
totals.
each other over
Now,
the
bear
head
in
with
mind, we're
sticks and
just looking
stones
at
for a minute.
battle deaths.
Yeah. Oh,
not
yeah,
fighting.
for sure. Yeah.
But
We've
those
been beating
two
shit
are
at each other with sticks and sharp things for a very long
Peace
time.
is a difficult thing to measure. It's a bit like counting the people who didn't die in wars that never happened. We give such importance to the word peace, but we don't tend to notice it when it occurs or report on it. Sometimes it takes reminding ourselves of how terrible war once was to see the peace that has been growing around us. Of course, this trend may not continue, and it's not clear
It's
how
an
looking at these
American right
charts
now,
can help
seeing
us
some
make
of
the
the
right
things that have
decisions
gone on
to ensure that it
around my
does.
own country in the past, like, 2 years.
Yeah, yeah, it's
The
ridiculous.
longer the long piece
I
grows,
feel like this guy's
the more
eating his
significant it
own
becomes.
words now.
Until
So if
2020,
watching the
dude.
news doesn't make us
Yeah.
feel hopeful about where things are heading.
I feel like
Watching
you
the
need an
numbers
upgrade or an
might.
update. Updates, and he's like, the whole world's gone to hell.
Yeah, for sure. COVID killed everything.
No, because I feel like if you stacked those numbers up against COVID, like now I feel like.
Oh, yeah.
So listen, guys, if you know of a video that tells you about the COVID process in between, like wars,
like to
I want to
support this
see
project
where that
and
measures up,
encourage new
because I
episodes,
feel like COVID's not
please
even
follow
close
us
to
using one of
that
the
Oh,
options.
yeah, no.
throughout the entire.
No,
Yeah.
And consider
absolutely
paying
not.
the suggested ticket price for today's show.
There was a
Thank you
ticket
very
price.
much.
For the show.
I didn't pay for this
Nope.
show,
No, I didn't.
but I appreciate you.
That was pretty good though, dude.
I enjoyed a lot of that.
So like,
I
feel like
think
his-
it's over. I don't know. It's still
Is
counting, It's still counting down. I don't know. There's nothing going on with the
Nothing going
headphone
on.
stuff. I'm just gonna go ahead.
if
and stop
nuclear
it.
war erupted, how many would die? I feel like that would be
All of
something
them.
interesting to watch.
Do I
Also,
have to pause this? Okay. So listen, guys, that was incredible, and I truly do appreciate you
Yeah.
for showing me that. What's
Yeah.
the name again? I can't remember. I'm so horrible.
Victor.
Victor. Thank you very much, Victor.
for sure, that was sweet. When you stack the numbers like that in a graph like that, it's
It's hard to look at. It's unfathomable.
it really is. It really is. And just knowing like how, it's crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's well.
It was amazing to watch. So for sure, thank you for recommending that. That was awesome. I had a great time.
Absolutely.
Really did.
If you guys have anything else you want to show us, put it down there
Put
in the
it down
comment
there.
section. There's a little link down there in the comment section that has where you can buy the shirts and stuff. This guy had a hoodie, but you can't wear the thingies because of the.
Yeah. The one on Streamlabs isn't green though, so maybe I'll wear it.
You should wear it.
I should wear it. That way you can see it. But we do
But-
have merch. We got social media.
Yeah, all the social media is right down here.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a donation link down there in the comment situation. If you hit that up and you really want us to watch your video, it'll get you all the way to the top, and we'll watch yours as soon as we can.
That's right.
I'm
I'm
Think
good,
about
man.
anything else?
I'm good.
I'm good too. You guys good?
Have a good evening.
Have a great night.